Hello, hello, and welcome to more After Shadow Space, with episode 11.5 of Shadow Space, the aftermath of Rebirth. I don't actually know what I'm gonna call this yet, but man, that was a good session. That was a fun session. I had a lot of fun with the chase scene. Very reminiscent of the similar chase scene we had happen on Lazarus. My chase mechanics in my system are loosely pulled from the Call of Cthulhu chase mechanics, but with my own twists added into them. I think I can get a little bit of fun with mechanic talk on this episode, as well as some very fun lore talk. And I don't know if y'all picked up on it on last week's After Shadow Space, but I used it as a chance to drop some hints at the stuff that were being talked about in this week's episode. But so let's talk a little bit about this episode. First off, we know where Trampy went. I knew from the very get-go that Trampy had immediately gone after Hopper the moment she was kidnapped, knowing that it was important to Barbara and knowing that he would have been the only one to have the chance to go there. It's sort of why he disappeared from sight and wasn't present during the previous episode. And even if I was unsure whether or not I would get to do a solo Hopper episode, I knew that I would have that be the reveal that Trampy was with her. The exact outcome of what happened with him with her entirely was going to... So, if I didn't get to record this episode, it was basically going to be that as soon as they finished whatever plotline they were in and began to go after Hopper again, they'd start their journey, start fighting some pulsars, and depending on how soon the player got back from their trip they were on, they would find Hopper and Trampy already having Trampy having already saved Hopper, the two of them fighting their way away from their captors, the pulsars that were in disguise. But as far as mechanical stuff that I can talk about that was very fun this week, first off, Trampy was constantly taking damage that I was tracking in the background and slowly dying of radiation poison that entire time. The longer that fight went, the worse he would have been, and if the fight went for too long, he would have actually first passed out, and then, if she didn't escape fast enough with him, died. Luckily, that didn't happen, and I gave it a very generous timer. It was a 25 turn timer before he passed out, and then an additional 10 turns before he died. And so long as she escaped the fight before then, everything would have been fine. And we got a glimpse at a new, very, fun villain, who I've been receiving a great many questions about from Hopper's player Doodle since the episode happened, and I've had to tell her, sorry, can't answer your questions, sorry. But yeah, we've had the very fun, mysterious man in white, or as Doodle's taken to calling him Father White. I'm very much looking forward to playing him out. And so, yeah, the fun mechanic of his gun, I'm going to eventually drop a full mechanical breakdown of his weapon onto the Ko-fi, available to, I believe, double tier supporters. Hang on, let me take a peek at my Ko-fi. Which, yes, I have a Ko-fi now linked down below, and people who support can get access to special content. Yeah, if you are at double tier or above, you will be able to get the Man in White's guns stats. So that's a fun thing. But one element of its stats that I can at least mention is that he is able to perform 6 attacks with it on a turn. With the idea being that he rolls... but what it is each one each additional point increases the difficulty in a way or how do I want to put this? The way that I was doing it is I would have him do a normal attack roll, And then it would be modified, where the more shots, if he chose to fire only a single shot, he would perform an attack roll like normal, but every additional shot he fired made it harder. But he has an incredibly high level of skill, allowing him to get a fuck ton of shots off of that in one turn. And the idea is that this gun is actually basically 6 shadow plasma guns put together in a revolving barrel, so that they are in a cycle of constant cooling, and he never needs to perform a cool action with the gun. By the time the first barrel makes it back to the tip, it's already cooled off, allowing this gun to just fire continuously. It's just that the issue is this new spinning mechanism, and it gives it recoil, something most guns in this setting do not have. Words. Sorry. Me saying words is me trying to think, but not wanting to have dead air. It's a thing I do a lot, and it's a weird tick I have. The goons. So, is this a thing that's explained in the rules as written in the Discord? Which again, join the Discord and you can get access to all of the Heart of Action rules. Heart of Action being the system that Shadow Space is performed in. I'm just taking a glance there. Do I have goon rules in there? Which, yes, I know with the new slang term gooning, that is a very, very funny term, but I'm referring to, like, the classic movie terminology of goons, like how a minion has a bunch of goons. I don't. So, this is a fun thing I could talk about a little bit that isn't written in those free rules. Enemies are generally divided into 2 groups, or 2 categories. There are major enemies, or screen enemies, you know, the very scary enemies, like Gas Mask Guy and the Man in White, or Lazarus, or Dr. Keith, and these villains all have fully built stat blocks similar to the players, perform actions like everybody else, and are fully independent beings. And then there's Goon class enemies. These are the nameless drones that are intended to be fought en masse. And the way a Goon class enemy works is that one successful hit landed on a Goon takes them out of the fight. They're gone. But the Goons collectively act like a sort of pseudo hive mind, where they all share a single action pair. So rather than every individual Goon taking an action, I'll usually put them into groups classed together who will perform actions together. So in the case of this fight, the 12 Goons all were acting together, and generally a goon only rolls a single die on their action, basically flipping a coin to see if they successfully do what they're trying to do, then modified by the player's rolls. So generally, a player fighting a single goon will always win, because the player rolls, even if they have 0 skills in what they're doing, rolls 5 dice, while the goon is rolling 1. Meaning the player just needs 1 or 2 of their 5 dice to roll a 5 or above in order to beat a goon, assuming the goon even rolls good to begin with. But the real threat of goons is the numbers game. This is a mechanic in Heart of Action that allows, like this is me directly critiquing an issue I have with D&D, where the more enemies you put in a D&D fight, the harder it becomes and the slower combat becomes. And that is lame. Because what if you want the players to feel really cool by having them fight large amounts of enemies all at once? And there's plenty of homebrew rules for this. My favorite being an old homebrew rule of an old DM I had called the Cleave Follow Through, where if 2 enemies were next to each other and your attack killed one of them, the damage from your attack would carry to the next enemy as a extra free attack. That's just a D&D thing. But I wanted to fix this action economy issue that D&D has, and the goons are how I do it. Where the goons are an incredibly easy to kill enemy, that the more of them you add into a fight, the more intimidating that group of enemies becomes, but they can be very quickly, with some clever thinking, eliminated. Hopper didn't really do it this week, but if Hopper had, say, performed a risky run forward to move forward a few spaces, and then spent their next action attacking the goons, every successful die that they rolled, divided by the number of shots they fired off, is how many goons they would kill. So if they rolled, say, 3 successes, and their gun successfully fired 5 bullets, they would have killed 3 goons. If that math makes sense. You know what I mean. They would kill a number of goons equal to their successes, so long as they managed to fire off that many shots with their automatic gun's dice roll. And so, those 3 goons being killed would have turned that from a level 12 attack being fired at them every turn into a level 9 attack. Meaning the goons would have rolled 9 dice, and if only about half of those dice succeeded, that means the goons would have been getting, rounding down, 4 successes. Meaning she would need to only roll 4 successes on a defense, assuming the goons were right next to her. But if she had just, say, 4 spaces of distance between her and them, they would have just missed entirely, because not enough of them would have been firing guns at her. And that's another fun mechanic of the goons, is they more or less have stormtrooper aim. And part of why goons are designed this way is I wanted to harken to old kung fu movies where a single guy is fighting like 40 men effortlessly. And in those old kung fu movies, that took the form of the enemies sort of taking turns to fight them. This is a system that I think I perfected in a Batman tabletop campaign I am doing with my brother, in which I wanted to emulate Arkham's combat style in a tabletop format, and it has worked with flying colors and has been incredibly satisfying. In that campaign, generally speaking, in combat, his Batman character has a number of special abilities. So when he's fighting a group of enemies in melee combat, he can choose to punch an enemy, parry an enemy, where if he rolls good enough, he deals damage and prevents all incoming damage. He can stun a group of enemies, which basically makes it so that in the next turn they don't get to perform attacks. And keep in mind, he can do 2 actions on a turn. Or he can use a gadget, and he's got a fuck ton of gadgets. So there's so many fun ways that he can... and that's part of the idea of Heart of Action. So, like, you see it a lot more in my Fallout campaign, is that long-term in Heart of Action, when I have the physical form out, rather than a character sheet, I want players to have a character deck. Excuse me. And that deck will have all their unique powers, and similar to how in Magic the Gathering you tap abilities as you use them, the player would tap their powers as they use them to help them track them and stuff. It's something that I'll be able to play out much better when I have a more physical version of things in front of me. Something that the Fallout campaign is very much starting to get. But yeah. So, that's sort of... Man, it took me 13 minutes just to talk about the first half of this campaign, the fight scene. Or this session, I mean. So now let's talk about the second half of this session, which is the, Sorry, stuffy nose. I think my cat allergy's acting up because I didn't take Allegra today. The second half, the town, the mountain village, Mount Darwin, which we got a little bit of a hint at through a random encounter the players got of the Darwinist preacher. That's something that Broken Triangle is going to have as a running theme, is religious iconography and ideals. So, we kind of got Darwin's whole backstory there, and like I said previously, I sort of had dropped hints in last week's After Shadow Space, to prime people for what was going to be coming if they watch all the After Shadow Spaces. So in this week's thing, we heard a whole bunch about about a seed ship 301, I think it was. I don't have the notes open in front of me while I'm talking right now, which I probably should. But my notes are a hot mess. As a DM, I'm a terrible note taker, but I've been able to make up for that by being an incredibly skilled improviser. Um, and also sort of rolling with the punches and like letting players do funny things like rename major NPCs, because ultimately the name of an NPC doesn't matter, and if the players think it's funner to call the big scary man Dr. Keith, that's fine. Even Gas Mask Guy's name, like when he was first introduced, wasn't intended to be a major recurring villain. I just sort of gave this guy, this was in old Shadow Space, that was pre-streaming days, like this campaign was from like over a year ago. He was just a one-off villain. He wasn't even intended to be a villain. It was so I'm gonna share the story of Gas Mask Guy's introduction. The players had arrived, the players of Seth, Max, and Hopper had showed up in a mall and had all sort of split up to do shopping, and Hopper had decided to go into a tattoo parlor and try and get a, like, was considering getting a tattoo. And I thought for a moment, I was like, I can make this into a very interesting encounter, because at this point, they were being actively tracked down by the Pulsars. The Pulsars all over the place were looking for the group. So I was like, what if the guy in the tattoo parlor happened to be a Pulsar? Because, like, I had already established that the Pulsars were very heavily integrating themselves into groups all over the galaxy and running like little small businesses that they use as fronts for illegal activity. And so I had already, like, before I had made this decision, I was like, oh, what's a cool way I can describe this character? I was like, oh, as you enter the tattoo parlor, the guy has a tight gas mask over his face because, like, and that like, the reason he had the gas mask was because the colony they were on was a mining colony with terrible air quality, and so everybody was wearing some degree of gas mask, and I just described his as a full face gas mask rather than a lower face respirator. And I was like, oh, and he's wearing like a sort of black poncho, which, as the encounters kept going, that black poncho became much more of a black cowl that was interconnected with his mask. Cause, like, so Hopper had tried to get a tattoo from him, and he saw her serial number that she has on a part of her body, and I was just like, ooh, I can lean into this, and I was like, oh, he's gonna start acting a little strange when he sees that mark, and he's gonna start asking you questions about it, implying that this man somehow knows something about Hopper and who she is and her backstory somehow. And she was like, I'm just gonna go, and he was like, no, you're not, and got Pulsars. And they called on backup to try and hold her, and a fight broke out, and she went and found the others, and when she first encountered, like, it was the funny scene of, has she escaped the scene and ran off? One of the other players had, because we were sort of rapidly jumping between the three players, one of the other players was just sort of haggling a deal of some kind, and it's like, oh, as you're haggling, outside the store window, as you look past the shopkeep, you see Hopper go running by with her guns out, and a group of Pulsars trailing behind her. And so that player just, like, immediately ran out of the building, shot the Pulsar, ran over, and was like, Hopper, what's happening? She just turned, Gas Mask Guy. And that's where that moment, that name just stuck. And, like, once Seth showed up, Seth was like, what's going on? And both players turned to him and were like, Gas Mask Guy, Gas Mask, like, it was both times, Gas Mask Guy, Gas Mask Guy, Gas Mask Guy, Gas Mask Guy, like, scared statement, question, scared statement, confirmation statement, confirmation shout. Like, that was the format both times. It was a very funny moment. It's part of what I love about this group of players, is they have very good, like, comedic synergy while also staying serious when it needs to be serious. But yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent there. What was I talking about? I was talking about, Darwin. I don't know what set me off on that tangent. Yeah, Darwin. So, like, we got his story of coming from Starship 301 or Seed Ship 301, which crashed here, which crash landed here, and he became a Shadow Touched. As his body passed through the Shadow Drive, his whole body was disintegrated, which I realized there's arguably a lore discrepancy there, and it's not that there's a lore discrepancy, it's more so me poorly communicating information in the moment of the scene playing out. Starship 301, or Seed Ship 301, I should say, words. He was not, I don't remember exactly how I told the story in the episode now, but he did not come from Seed Ship 301. That's a mistake that I keep saying by mistake. They were coming here looking for Seed Ship 301, which was one of the seed ships that was lost long ago. Seed Ship was supposed to land on planet Charon, and this ship came looking for it, and then crashed when it was caught in a storm. Darwin passed through the shadow drive of the starship that he was on, and his body was disintegrated molecule by molecule, and that, like, as the whole ship crashed, he went flying down into the mountain, which is a heavily magnetic mountain. Something that hasn't really come through yet, mainly because Shadow Steel is a not heavily magnetic material, so in the case of Hopper, it doesn't really fuck with her body too heavily. And she also has a mild magnetic manipulation ability, and also the whole mountain is now weird because Darwin's consciousness was placed into it. But the whole mountain more or less is like... So the mountain is actually located at the northern pole of the entire planet, giving it an incredible magnetic charge that the already magnetic minerals found within the planet amplified. Now, normally this level of magneticness wouldn't really be incredibly noticeable. The worst thing you might get is that some magnetic particles of dust might stick to something metallic you have, normally. But once he was put into the heart of the planet, or not the heart of the planet, but into the mountain, he was able to directly his Shadow Touched ability allowed him to begin directly manipulating the magnetic field of the planet, and his consciousness became sort of imbued within the mountain and the northern magnetic field of Charon. And so he's able to control the microscopic magnetic dust particles to then operate things on a microscopic level through controlling this little dust. So, like, his body doesn't actually live in the mountain, but in the magnetosphere that is around the mountain. Or sort of both, I guess. You know, he's both the mountain and the magnetosphere. His consciousness is equally spread across the two. And the three rocks that he wants transported also have parts of him in it, because they were the rocks that he had passed through as he connected with the mountain and the magnetosphere, as he happens to go directly into the Northern Pole. It's a lot of basically magic sci-fi bullshit. But that's, like, sort of the whole point of the Shadow Touched, is the Shadow Touched, like, don't make sense at fucking all. They are impossible to pluck apart in a scientific manner and understand. They defy all of our understandings of the laws of physics. And a thing that I meant to bring up in last week's After Shadow Space, but it got lost in the discussion of other things, is generally Shadow Touched are, like, witch hunted. Because when Shadow Touched first started appearing was during the peak of the Shadow War, the war that led to the creation of the Trade Council. Also known as the Space War, or the First Space War, even though there's not been a second. Or the Great War, or the Galactic War. It has a lot of little names because different communities across space gave it their own unique names and spins. But, words. in those early days, a lot of people became shadow touched and began using those powers in a crazy, fucked up manner. And this led to the common understanding that all shadow touched are fucking insane. You know, they've all lost their mind. And they're all dangerous and to be feared, and they have, like, it is too much power for one person to hold, the power that the shadow touched have. So it should be avoided, or they should be hunted and eliminated, is the ruling of the Trade Council. Now, certain select groups are much more interested in studying and understanding them and trying to unlock these powers, or, in the case of the Cult of Darwin, worshipping, or the Union of Darwin, worshipping him. Words. I can use them. Again, me saying words is just me, like, trying to, like, think, but not wanting to just stay silent while I'm thinking. Words. Yeah. So, Hopper and, Trampy made it into the city, and, you know, I just gave you the more clarified... Oh, yeah, so, after Darwin became what he became, after he became Mount Darwin, he wasn't actually named Darwin before this event. He would go on to make himself have the name Darwin. Sorry, I just knocked a thing over. He would go on to give himself the name Darwin after Charles Darwin, because he views himself as pushing humanity into a new stage of evolution via the splicing that he is doing on this mountain. Like what he did to T-Dog. Words. But yes, now they're T-Dog. Me trying to drip little bits of humor into this serious world for levity. T-Dog's new design also is like... I'm trying to draw from pulp science fiction of the 1920s with how I made him look. Has this sort of like... I realized I did not get a chance to describe what his new outfit is. I'll re-describe it in the next episode likely, but to describe it here now, T-Dog's new outfit is he wears a pure black jumpsuit, like many people wear jumpsuits, with golden trim, and he wears it with a deep V-cut, where he keeps it zipped down to, like, just above his belly button. And it has a golden zipper and gold trim on it. And, like, I was trying to call on, like, pulp science fiction of the 1920s with his, like, bronzed skin with white fur, with silvery white fur, and a black suit with gold trim. Like, he's supposed to look like a character you would see that would not look out of place in, like, John Carter of Mars kind of content. But yeah, and the reason so few people were talking, it didn't get to come up. The religious group there have all begun to take vows of silence in order to meditate and try and widen their connection with Darwin. Okay, but so back to talk about Darwin's backstory and clarifying it. Sorry, I'm all over the place right now. So after the ship crashed, he would have used his powers to heal many of the sick. And as the storm passed, they would have soon found the crashed seed ship. And they would have begun setting up a city around it. And he mentioned that city they set up around the crashed starship is where the bottom right city is. I don't have its name in front of... Seed City. I think it was just called Seed City. Because it was formed around a seed ship. But, so they formed that city, built it up, began doing a bunch of research, and then and then what ended up happening is the storm moved over that city and destroyed it, and it's not moved off the city since. Like the eye of the storm that circles the planet. And the whole planet is a state of constant storm, it's just that's the worst storm there is on the whole planet. Like, it's like the red spot on... Jupiter? Jupiter's the one with the red spot, right? Yeah, Jupiter's red spot. where if you were to look at this planet from the surface, it would be a very like green and white colored planet with a big dark green splotch right over that city. Yeah. Sorry, just thinking a little. If there's more I want to talk about. But I think I've discussed everything I wanted to about this episode. I had a lot more to talk about this episode because a lot more happened mechanically and lore-wise than the last one. So I hope you've all enjoyed this, and I hope you're all looking forward to the next episode of Shadow Space. I know I certainly am. Hope to see all of you there for that, and ta-ta for now.